understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is the podcast that is going to explain everything about tariffs, trade, Trump, and the chaos that's going on in financial markets and the chaos that's going on around the world as the rest of the world reacts to Trump. But all John is concerned about is that I stay still, right? I have, as anybody's seen me on telly or whatever.
He said too much sugar. And
it's not too much sugar. I get excited by the issue. So I get excited by the topics and then I jump around. And then John says to me, he's like, remember the teacher? Anyone? You're the teacher and I'm the excited, slightly ADHD child at the back of the class, jumping around, can't sit still, right? And I'm trying, because I get excited. I mean, I know there are very few people, John, in your life who get excited by tariffs, but I am one of them. This has been my week. I've loved it. The whole thing, the formula, the this, that, the exchange rates, the whole thing. But all I can tell you, it's party time for me. I love it. I mean, it's very serious. I'm not taking away from the seriousness of it, the severity of what's happening. But we need to explain a couple of things on the podcast today, right? One is there's been so much bullshit spoken about the levels of the tariffs and why there's a difference. There's a formula, John. You know I like a formula?
Yes, you love
There's a formula. The thing about the formula is, right, if a kid had come up with this formula in Trinity, where I'm teaching this week, to explain protectionism, I would have failed them. It is so basic, right? And it's so off whack. And yet the largest economy in the world is basing its tariff and trade and international economic policy on a formula that makes no sense.
But this formula, it either came from ChatGPT
it looks like
DeepSeek.
It looks like that. I'd say ChatGPT because DeepSeek's Chinese. Yeah. Right? Okay, on the basis they can't have that.
Yeah, they would have dropped the Chinese.
Or, I would say if an ordinary level Leaving Cert economics student wrote that down, you'd laugh at them. But first things first, what we're looking at here is amateurs, as in amateur economists, working for or being led by unaccountable incompetents, right? Who are all under the regime of a narcissist using other people's money to make up a trade policy.
But Mike, can I just stop you there? I mean, it's quite easy, and a lot of people are saying, you know, they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand economics and stuff. A lot of these guys, most of the cabinet, are billionaires. So they know something about something. So what are they missing?
That is a very, very fair point, that they know something about something. But the problem with being rich, a rich man in particular, is rich men believe that because they are rich, they should be listened to on a whole host of things that they know nothing about.
Yes.
Right? As a general rule. So
yes.
They go on about history, they go on about economics, they go on about art, they go on about culture, they go on about society. If I could just run this place for half a day, we'd get it all right. So there is a type of brain and there's a type of intelligence. There's a sort of almost an instinctive intelligence that I've noticed in very wealthy people, right? Very rich blokes, very rich men, that they're very good at accumulating wealth. They're quite good readers of people. They're quite good manipulators of a room. You know, they have a talent.
This is not describing Elon Musk.
No, it's not, right? But they have a talent. But what I'm saying is, it is even more baffling that people who have been in the commercial world for so long are coming up with or arriving at the conclusion that the reason the United States feels uncomfortable about its own economic destiny is because other people are better at exporting than it is. This is a bizarre situation. This would be, for a rich person, for somebody who owns a company, you would say most people who run companies are constantly looking at the competition. What are they doing? What's their market share? What's their pricing structure? What are we doing? Are we doing it right? Etc. Right? Very, very few companies will say the way in which we get rich is to ban competition from everywhere else. Because if you ban competition from everywhere else, you will end up with second-rate products, serving a second-rate market, and your employees in the aggregate will have second-rate wages.
Or the other way of looking at it as well could be, as companies grow, a bit like Amazon and all the rest, they become monopolies. So if a country grows and expands it and it takes everybody in
But the problem
under
with the
the same rules, and then they have the monopoly of trade.
The problem with the United States is the United States believes it's bigger than it is. The United States accounts for around, as you said last week, about 10%, 11% of international trade. That means 89% of international trade is not done with the United States.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Is not done with the United States. Repeat after me, it's not done with the United States. So what I'm looking at here is this, and it's not just Trump, it's all the people around him, right? So the MAGA movement have succeeded in driving possibly the three most important prices in the world down. That's not good, right? The dollar is in free fall.
Yeah.
And that's something I want to come back to. Price of oil in free fall.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that. And the long-term rate of interest falling. Now, the reason the long-term rate of interest is falling is because the world expects a recession in America.
Yeah.
Not only is the long-term rate of interest falling now in America, but inflation expectations are beginning to rise.
Yeah.
Which means that the Fed is highly unlikely to come to the rescue of Donald Trump. Brent crude is falling, and the dollar. Now, economic theory says...
And the stock market as well.
Stock markets are all collapsing.
We'll come back
right?
to that.
So economic theory suggests that normally when you have tariffs, your currency rises. Now, why is that? It's because if you have tariffs, it means that the amount of money leaving the United States diminishes.
Yeah.
The very reason is that the tariffs work. So the currency should rise long term.
Yeah.
The opposite is happening. What I think we're seeing, John, is the entire world looking at the performance in the Rose Garden and thinking, I don't buy what these guys are selling. And I am worried about the future. I'm worried about the dollar. I'm selling the dollar. Now, I'm selling the stock market. You can see this is all percolate down into activity in America. This is exactly why we did the podcast a couple of weeks ago on all the indicators in America, which are pointing downward, which is called the soft data. So you have two ways of looking at the economy. There's the hard data and the soft data. The soft data is what we call the leading indicators, and they're like surveys. So that's the difference between hard and soft data. Soft data is what people think, and hard data is what people do, right?
Yeah.
But if the soft data is turning down, okay,
that's fake news versus reality.
No, what it is, it's basically when you ask people, what do you think of the future? What you're capturing is perceptions of what they're going to do in 2 or 3 months' time. So if I think the future's great, I'm confident, chances are I'll take out a loan, I'll try to set up a business, I'll go on holidays, I'll spend, right? The soft data now is all suggesting that what Americans are thinking, consumers, businesses, etc., is that they are going into some sort of recession. So what that tells you is in 2 or 3 months' time, the hard data, the actual indicators, will reflect that and will go into a tailspin. So what you're seeing now, the soft data is all over the shop. The dollar is falling when it should be rising, according to theory. And the reason it's falling is because people are saying, this guy is in control of this currency. This currency is the reserve currency. But the people who are actually implementing policy don't seem to have a rashers what they're doing. So this is, it seems to me, you couldn't have imagined a more perfect storm. You think, for example, about the tech bros. The tech bros all got on side with your man, Trump. And the supposition was that he would deregulate, he would be hard on China, he would deregulate, they would get favorable treatment. And then you look at what's happened to Apple. Apple's lost about $1 trillion in value.
Yeah.
The amount of value that Apple has lost is bigger than the entire value of Walmart. Okay?
Really?
Just think about this, right?
And they've also promised to invest $500 billion in America.
But why have Apple lost?
They don't have the money to do that.
They don't have the money, right? Well, they probably do, but why have Apple lost? Because the global economy, as was constructed over the last 40 years, is a profoundly intricate web of suppliers, of supply chains, of relationships, of businesses in thousands of different locations, hundreds of different countries, different continents, right? Companies like Apple have most to lose. The large American corporations that are multinationals have most to lose in this situation, which is why their companies' stocks are getting hammered, right? But if you look at it in the round, what you couldn't have imagined, that it feels like Trump's been in for about 3 years, about 10 years. He's been in for 3 months.
We're all exhausted.
I'm exhausted. He's been in for 3 months. So I want to focus on this is that the initial reaction of every single economic indicator, financial, monetary indicator, has been this policy is mad.
Yeah.
And the reaction has been swift and brutal. Now, the question is, what is the policy? And that's what I want to talk to you about today.
Can I just ask you, just before you get there, we were talking about the billionaires and earlier and their kind of strange view of the world. And it's something that you hear particularly from the MAGA crew and stuff. Is this policy as a result of viewing a country as a company?
Exactly.
And trying to run a country like
I think you're absolutely right. So we've always said that one of the great rules of thumb of economics, macroeconomics, not microeconomics, macroeconomics, is that it is counterintuitive. Now, why is it counterintuitive? It is counterintuitive because once you go from dealing with one unit, as in the company, to many millions of units, as in the economy, what happens is this paradox of aggregation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is the major underpinning of, and I always say this to students, start thinking about macroeconomics as counterintuitive and lots of things will begin to make sense, right? The key issue here is that every company in an economy is selling to each other. So basically you start with that basic identity, which is your income is my demand. My demand is my income. My income, therefore, is your income. So if we are all growing together, then there's no reason to believe the economy can't grow exponentially. But if you are looking at it as just one country, like one household, then what you say things like, well, wouldn't it be great if we applied the rules of a household to the economy? So we all should save because saving's good, isn't it? That makes our balance sheet great.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But if you're saving, where's my income?
Yeah.
Because you're not spending. And if you're not spending, I have no income. And if I have no income, the font of actual savings is income because you can't save without having income.
Of course, yeah.
So that's the aggregation. So we have to look at it in a much more complicated way.
Yeah.
Right? But a little bit more nimble. And again, what we're seeing here in the tariff debate is people looking at the economy in a very emotive way. So Trump got up and he says, we've been ripped off. People are ripping off the Americans and this is awful. And we're going to figure out how much you're ripping us off and we're going to impose reciprocal tariffs, right? Now, we know that tariffs are about 2.5%, let's say between EU and the United States. A little bit higher in some Asian countries, but not much, right? So we know that if America was to impose reciprocal tariffs, maybe global tariffs would go up by about 2 or 3%, right? If that was the case. So they had to come up with something that was a bit more convoluted than that. So lots of people were saying, where do you get this 39 figure? He said, those Europeans have been imposing tariffs on us of 39%, and we are going to be very generous. We're going to halve that, and that's the tariff we're going to. Right? So people are scratching their heads saying, this 39%, where did this come from? Right? And lots of people were saying, well, maybe it could be a combination of VAT and non-tariff barriers and et cetera, et cetera. Transpires, right?
Yeah.
That, as you said, the ChatGPT has
Yes.
come up with a formula. The formula is the trade deficit of each country that America runs with each country divided by the exports of that country to America. Now, I can tell you this makes no sense in economics. I don't know where it comes from, right?
Yeah. And he applied that to everybody,
To
not
everybody.
just...
So, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah,
So,
including the penguins.
So, including the penguins, right? So I'll tell you what it does, right? And this, of course, there's lots of stuff, Brexiteers saying, oh, look at this, we're getting 10%, that's a result of Brexit. That's all horseshit, right? So basically, here's all you need to know. European Union exports $605 billion euros worth of goods to America every year.
Yeah.
It imports 370 billion, right?
Right.
So that means that the European Union runs a trade surplus with the United States of 235 billion.
Yeah.
If you divide that by the amount of exports that Europe exports, which is the 605 billion, you get a figure of 0.39.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's all made up, right? Now, Ireland...
That's lovely and simple, isn't
Right.
it?
And so they've done this, like there must be some poor geezer in there
Yeah.
who's just come out of college, who's working as an intern.
He's one of the Doge guys.
He's working as an intern and they said, come up with a formula. He's like, fuck, okay, I'll come up with this formula.
It's your man Big Balls or whatever it was.
Who's Big Balls?
He was Elon Musk's guy.
I didn't know.
He was one of the kids that Elon Musk brought in.
As the Doge, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, but let's like this is very important for listeners to understand, right? So this is the formula. That's what the 3.9. You can do if you're really nerdy, and this is what I was doing last night in the back of the envelope. Just for you, John, right? Just for you. I was up last night doing this. Now look, think about Ireland. Ireland's in a really weird position because we have been tariffed at 20% because we're in the EU.
Yeah.
Had we not been in the EU, think about this.
Yeah.
Ireland exports 73 billion euros worth of goods to America. We import 23 billion. We run a trade surplus with America of 50 billion as a result, 73 minus 23.
And ChatGPT says?
And ChatGPT says you divide that 50 by the 73, which is our exports to America, we would have got a figure of 0.67. So we would have had a 67% tariff imposed on us. Cut it in half, it would have been about 34%, right?
Right.
So had we not been in the EU, we have been so lucky. Just don't tell anyone this. We're hiding behind the EU on this, right?
What have the Europeans ever done for us?
They have disguised our mendacity for many years, right? So had we not been in the EU, that figure on the formula would come out as 0.68.
Yeah.
It would have been a 68% tariff. Then Trump would have said, the Irish, I like them. Cut it in half, 34%. So we have a 15% almost subsidy.
Yeah.
Having been in the EU, right? Now that is dramatically positive for us, okay? Just don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Okay?
You reckon they're on to us?
They're on to us. Now, the Brexiteers in England are saying, look, we got 10% tariffs, right? That's because of the special relationship. No, it's fucking not. I'll tell you what it's because, right? In the formula, John, right? England exports $60 billion to America every year. It imports 57 billion. The residual is 3.
Yeah.
As near as a balanced budget as possible. So they are suffering the 10% general tariffs.
Yes, yeah.
Because they're not very good at exporting.
Okay.
Right?
I mean,
so if you think of the difference, so just to put it into context, right? Ireland has a population of 5 million people, 5.5, right? We export $73 billion worth of goods to America every year. Britain has a population of nearly 70 million.
Yeah.
And it exports only 60 billion. So Ireland's actual exports to America are higher than Britain's.
Yeah.
And what that means is that having hid behind the EU, we are blessed because we are being treated on the average when we're a complete outlier. So that's when I said the other day that this could have been much worse. It could have been much, much worse had Trump done what many people feared, which was he had come up with the expression, the dirty 15.
Yeah.
And the dirty 15 were the countries that had the most significant trade surpluses with the United States. Ireland was number 4 on that in total trade surpluses, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
And of course, if you were to do this per head of population, let's say we have 5 million people, we have a trade surplus of 50 billion with the Americans.
Yeah.
That means we have a trade surplus of $10,000 per person with the Americans.
Right.
China, if you do the math, has a trade surplus of $272.
Right. Okay.
So we've $10,000. They have 270. We are a massive outlier on this.
Yeah.
So we are blessed that actually in the chaos, and it is chaotic.
Yeah,
If you drill down the details, the tariff that you got as a country had got nothing to do with your relationship with the United States, but it has got everything to do with the prowess or not of your exporting sector, which is why Vietnam has a tariff of 45% on it, because their figure came out at 0.9, which is 90% for the Americans, right? Why? Vietnamese people are too poor to buy American stuff. That's why they have a massive trade surplus, right? They make Nikes, they make runners. And we're actually going to do, John, a whole podcast on Southeast Asia.
Great.
For Thursday, on the impact of Southeast Asia, on what this has done, because he has destroyed the Asian economies. And I want to talk to you about that because it's a very serious strategic mistake, I would say. So let's get back to this, John.
Just before you do, then there's Russia, of course. No tariffs. But they have the 10% tariff. But it's because
they've got sanctions against them. They don't do any trade.
But they've
them.
so that's what I was going to say. So there's no tariffs because there's no trade.
So basically, what you have to do, right? The reason that Britain has only got 10% is because Britain and America cancel each other out. Their trade kind of balances.
Yeah.
So rather than give them zero tariffs, he said, you've got to get 10%, right? The reason that Russia has only 10% is there's no trade because of sanctions. But what I'm trying to explain to people is that the tariff has nothing to do with the lobbying of governments, with the lobbying of politicians, with special relationships, with all that at all.
Yeah. People were saying that. Didn't Micheál Martin do a great job?
Nothing to do with that, right? Micheál Martin did a great job, and Ireland did a great job by staying quiet about what the
I agree with
tariff
that.
should have been, which is a tariff of 68%, half at 34%.
Yeah.
We've managed to get 20%. Sorry for all the percentages, guys. I know it's a bit boring, all this sort of thing, but just to get your head around it. There is a logic in the tariffs. It is based on a crazy formula, and it's been applied across the board, which is why, as you said, there's 10% tariff on uninhabited islands.
Yes.
Right?
Those poor penguins.
Exactly.
There's some brilliant memes going around with that kind of stuff.
So that's where we're at.
Actually, can I just ask you, Mark, just to explain one thing very quickly, the difference between blanket tariffs and reciprocal tariffs.
Right. Okay. Reciprocal tariffs are what Trump is pretending to do.
Yeah.
What he's basically saying is, you tariff us, we'll tariff you.
Yeah.
Then he came up with the 39%, and he said, look, they tariff us by 39%.
Yeah.
We will reciprocate with tariffs, but I'm so generous. Is this the Julius Caesar? The Roman emperors used to show their power by forgiveness, not by killing, right? That he who forgives is the most powerful. Trump loves that sort of carry on.
Yeah.
So he said, we're not going to do 39%. We're going to have it because I'm nice, I'm kind, right? So I am reciprocating. I am doing to you what you've done to me. So the problem is he made up what we're doing to them.
Yes.
In the formula, John.
Yeah.
Which we know is either ChatGPT or a grad student. As I said,
big balls.
Ordinary level Leaving Cert would get fail if they came up with that formula for me.
Yeah.
If I was marking the exams, right? I'm terrifying my students. I'm going to teach them tomorrow. God love them, right? Now, I'll say, if you come up with that formula.
Yeah, actually, you should set them that. Like, what would you charge?
You charge, exactly. So blanket tariffs are when you just put tariffs on people for no reason. So Donald Trump has put on a blanket tariff and tries to pretend it's reciprocal.
Right.
That's what's happening.
That's what, yes, that was the reason for the question.
Okay. And what we'll do after the break, John, come back and think, where is this taking the global economy?
Grand. So, Mike, this last week has rocked the world, the economics world, the trade world, and the whole lot. So all of these reciprocal stroke blanket tariffs, what is it going to do to the world economy?
Okay, I think first of all, you've got to look at what it's going to do to the American economy, right? What we know, John, is throwing up barriers to competition never leads to highly productive outcomes. Do you remember the Lada, John?
I do, yes.
Do you remember the car, the Lada, right? It was a Russian-made car based on an Italian 1960s Fiat Mirafiori design.
Yeah.
Okay.
The best feature of the Lada was the fact that it had heated rear windscreen, so you keep your hands warm while you're pushing it.
Exactly. So the Lada is a product of tariffs. So Russia obviously sealed itself off from the West.
Yeah.
And one of the many functions of that, and one of the many results of that, was technologically the country went backwards. They were very good at making rockets, but very bad at making everything else. Now, why was that? It was because their engineers, their designers weren't keeping up with the relentless gales of creative destruction, John, which is what creates the modern economy. So when the Russians tried in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Russians were flying along because the price of oil was very, very high. So they were able to finance everything. As the price of oil fell in the mid-80s, two things happened. Perestroika, glasnost, and the emergence of Ladas on Irish roads.
Yes.
Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Now, why did Ladas emerge in the 1980s, late 80s on Irish roads and not in the 1960s? Because Russia was running out of money. So they had to get hard currency by selling these shite cars really cheaply.
Right.
Which is what they did.
Yeah.
Because as the oil price fell, they had no revenue, so they had to sell their stuff. And people laughed at these cars because it was like Back to the Future. Now that we're on really bad 1980s movies, we were on Ferris Bueller last week, Back to the Future, because the cars looked as if they came from the 50s.
Yeah.
That is what tariffs does to you. It makes you go backwards because you can't keep up with the engineering prowess of the rest of the world. The Chinese now have made flying cars.
I saw that actually.
Flying cars this week. They're miles ahead.
I want one.
They're miles ahead. Yeah. It's like a drone car.
Yeah.
They've made them. They will be flying soon.
Yeah.
The Chinese will have flying cars soon. There's one very, very famous inventor was asked to redesign. I can't remember his name was. Somebody was asked to redesign cars.
Yeah.
And he looked and he said, you know what we really should get rid of first? The wheel. And think about it. He said it's been around for 3,000 or 4,000 years. It's no good.
It's done its job.
Because there's only so much road. Cars have got to fly. Imagine the super highways in the sky, right? But that's the way you got to think. That's the way the Chinese think. So come back to it.
80s movies, DeLorean was way ahead of its
exactly. Exactly. Made in West Belfast.
Yeah.
Now, the point is that what we're looking at is the Ladaization of the American economy. If they try to grow behind ridiculously isolated trade barriers, because they won't be able to keep up with the latest developments.
Yeah.
And the latest developments are coming from Asia.
Yeah.
Right? We know that. And it's design, it's engineering.
Why are you saying they won't be able to keep up?
Because what is driving Asia and is driving all competitive markets is the Schumpeterian gales of creative destruction.
Yeah.
That better products come in all the time. It's the evolution of the economy. You cannot stop it.
Yeah.
Right? But if the Americans decide that they want to stop it and they want to base themselves on American technology, have you seen the state of American cars?
Yeah, they're awful. It's
awful.
It's the one thing that they're really crap at is cars.
Yeah, I'm just plucking it out of the bag, right?
Yeah.
Right? American cars are awful.
But this is
the less they rob ideas from the Asians, the more awful the cars are going to be.
Yeah. Do you remember a few weeks ago played a clip of Reagan in 1982
exactly the
explaining tariffs, saying that the more tariffs and protectionism you have, the less competition and therefore the less innovation.
The less innovation. Look, basically tariffs are a way of robbing someone's money and giving it to somebody else, right? So you're saying to the American consumer, you are going to have to pay through the nose now for the latest technology coming out of Germany or China, right?
Yeah.
That already then impoverishes the consumer straight away because they're paying more for the best. But we're not going to tariff our production, which is the worst. And what happens is crony businesses in America develop under the protection of tariffs. And what you get is a worse outcome for everybody.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what's going on. That, I think, is why if there's a logic in the financial markets, that, I think, is really the underlying logic, right? That's the first thing. So the Ladaization of the American economy. Second thing is, we know what happens. In the 1950s, there was a move in Latin America in particular and in Asia called import substitution. So what happens was, in the 1950s, people became obsessed by this thing called the terms of trade. Right? And the terms of trade is basically how much of your stuff can I sell to buy, let's say if you're Argentina, to buy something from America.
Yeah.
Now, because poor countries tend to be primary producers of things like agriculture, or as we used to export live cattle, right?
Yeah.
Very low value added business. What happens is the terms of trade of the poor country will always be quite negative. And by that I mean they'll have to sell more of their stuff to get one bit of American stuff.
Sure.
So if a Latin American was buying a Chevrolet in the 1950s from America, which was then the highest level of technology, they had to sell, let's say, 100 cattle or 1,000 cattle, right?
Yeah.
And over time, they had to sell more and more of their stuff because their terms of trade were falling, because the higher productivity, higher technological goods were coming from the United States.
Right.
So the Latin Americans said, hold on a second. What we're going to do is, why don't we make the American stuff at home? Why do we have import substitution? So everything we're importing, we will substitute that by making the stuff at home. So the Brazilians started to make cars, the Argentinians started to make cars, all that sort of stuff. And their hope was that over time, people would buy their cars, they would be able to export their cars, and what they would do is they would diminish the amount of cars coming in from the United States, which would help their trade balance.
Yeah.
That would help their currencies, and once their currency stabilized, their local people would have more confidence in the currency, and they wouldn't actually save in dollars, which they were doing, as opposed to pesos. So, looks great on the blackboard. In reality, what happened? They went backwards because technologically they couldn't keep up with the Americans at the time, who were technologically very, very active. So people started to laugh at the cars made in Latin America, kept breaking, a bit like our Ladas.
Yeah.
And again, the counterpoint to that is, look what happened in Germany, right? In the 1960s, the Germans exported everything. They created the Volkswagen Beetle.
Yeah.
They created a branding success, a marketing phenomenon, all that sort of thing. And they kept competing and competing and competing and becoming the best. Look, the thing is that competition is tough in any business. And the reason it's tough because you're competing with the best.
Yeah.
Once you decide that you're not going to compete with the best anymore, you're much more likely to end up with shoddy products at the end and a false sense of economic security, because you're producing second-rate cars for your consumers who are happy enough to buy them, but all the while you're losing market share worldwide because people don't want your stuff. So what I'm saying is, we've seen import substitution. It doesn't work. It looks great on paper. It was kind of national liberation economics. Exactly what Trump's about. Trump's about national liberation. Trump is like kind of a Che Guevara capitalist, right? It's all about national liberation and making stuff at home and screw the globalists and screw the outsiders.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed really amazingly in Ireland is that everybody weaponizes Trump to their own advantage, right? So, for example, on the left in Ireland, you know, when multinationals are threatened, as they are now by tariffs, they say, nah, I told you so. You became far too dependent on foreign capitalists and you didn't look after Irish workers. And we told you this would happen, right?
Yeah.
So that's on the left. Yeah. On the far right, the Conor McGregor right, it's all, nah, we told you it would happen, you globalists, you WEF stooges, you internationalists, right? Yeah. So it's amazing that the far right and the far left have weaponized tariffs and owned them themselves as a vindication of their hatred of what you would describe as the liberal order.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening all around the world. It is extraordinary. But to come back and to finish this particular podcast, right? What we're looking at is the Ladaization of the American economy. This is where it's going to go. If tariffs are here to stay. The question then you've got to ask yourself is Donald Trump a transactional president or a transformational president?
Right.
So this is the key thing. If Donald Trump is a transactional president, this is basically part of the bluff, counter bluff. I won.
Yeah.
I'll go back to Mar-a-Lago and I'll declare victory in the middle of June, and I will get all these European, Chinese supplicants to come and kiss the ring.
Yeah.
And I'm the big man.
Yeah.
And we move on.
Yeah.
Right. And we just enrich ourselves and our children. Right. And we just go back to being the family business. Right. That we are.
Yeah.
Back to the Sopranos. Okay. That's if he's a transactional. So if he's Tony Soprano, we're actually okay.
Yes.
So he goes back to basically the mafiosi approach of the family business. But if Trump has become transformational And by that, I mean that Trump has been banging on about tariffs for a long time, since the 1980s. If he has decided that he is more FDR, who he quoted the other night,
Yes,
which
he
always
did,
worries
yeah.
me, right?
Yeah.
So FDR was a transformational president, that he took the United States on a journey and a completely different route to the route the United States had been on up to the 1930s. So up to the 1930s, the Americans were the gold standard, free trade, small government, very little trade union movements,
Yeah.
et cetera, and no involvement with the outside world,
Yeah.
or very little, right?
Yeah.
FDR comes in, it's the New Deal, it's big government, it's managed trade. It's then after the Second World War, even though FDR was dead, but his legacy was getting involved with the world.
Yeah.
High taxation, or reasonably high taxation on corporations, all that sort of stuff. Free public education, the stuff that the Americans have. The Americans have the basis of a welfare state, right?
Yeah.
FDR, Roosevelt transformed America based on a vision that he and his wife had, Eleanor Roosevelt,
Yeah. She
which was
great.
much more close to the European social democratic worldview. He transformed America. If Trump proves to be a transformational president, that he is setting the seeds of a real revolution, and that MAGA is a movement, not just a slogan, and that he has his eyes set on changing America fundamentally and putting in place the conditions for J.D. Vance to be the next leader of the MAGA movement. And they want to win for the next election and election and election after that, then tariffs are here to stay.
And it also means that what normally happens, as you know, is that if something is successful in America, it ripples out across the world. So we have a MAGA world, as it were.
Exactly.
Copycats.
Copycats. And as we've said, humans are great copycats.
Yeah.
So that is the risk, that Trump has the stomach for the downturn, has the stomach for the fight, believes that MAGA is a strong enough ideological movement that even if they are up against it in the midterms, that it's worth transforming America in order to give Vance a chance to prolong the revolution. And if you see America through those lenses, then we're looking at a totally different story. The tariffs are just the beginning. What everyone is hoping is the tariffs are the end. It's like, we deal with this, with negotiation.
Yeah.
But if this is just the beginning, then we're in a totally different world.
Yikes.